blood. The first thing your mind registers is the smell of blood. In that disorienting moment after teleportation, the overwhelming stench of it, coupled with the foul odor of rot, fills your senses before your eyes can even take in your surroundings. But as you process what you see before you, a deep feeling of dread and horror takes root in the pit of your stomach. The heretic vessel was like a living thing, with creeping, pulsing flesh taking the place of circuits and cogitators. But it was the grisly trophies that adorned the halls of this hellish place that turned your blood cold. Neatly stacked piles of skulls, still wet with blood and scraps of flesh. Dismembered torsos hung on meat hooks like chandeliers. Fresh, flayed skin stretched across the walls. You have very little time to come to grips with the grisly scene before your eyes when a shout echoes from a nearby room. Your eyes snap towards the sound, and you see a silhouetted figure shambling towards you. Beneath all of the bloody decor and flesh, you do recognize that you are down in the bowels of this ancient cruiser. You have little time to consider your position as the slaves and cultists begin to converge on you. You and Teresa do not hesitate as you begin firing into the snarling shadows. They were like a swarm of bees slowly being alerted to a threat. More and more appear as your Gauss rifle cuts them down and Teresa's bolter tears through their flesh. Their faces contort into expressions of boundless rage. These slaves of chaos throw themselves at you and Teresa faster than you can mow them down. You and Teresa find yourselves fighting back to back as the circle of enemies close in on you. You drop the Gauss rifle in favor of your chainsword, and Teresa does the same. But in that moment, the wave of bodies surges forward. You only manage to get in one bloody slash before you and Teresa are engulfed by the screaming lunatics.
Get your hands off my pal!
Book suddenly emerged from the far doorway as his motley crew of beastmen unloaded heavy stubber fire into the room. Blood spattered against your visor as the bullets ripped through the unarmored cultists.
I'll give your blood god all the blood he can handle, and I hope he chokes on it.
Your power armor acted as perfect protection against the primitive small-caliber rounds of the stubbers. In mere moments, you went from being swarmed by cultists to being covered in blood and gore. You could hear fighting echoing throughout the ship as more pitmongers teleported in and began to rip into the chaos menials and corrupted servitors. You and Teresa struggle to your feet just as you begin to hear the roar of bolter fire in the distance.
Sounds like we have Space Marines incoming. Let's get the charge set, and then we need to get out of here.
Book's boys form a perimeter around the main engine room as you and Teresa work to arm the bomb and set the timer. You hide the device beneath a maintenance panel and set the melter bomb to blow in 6 minutes. The sounds of bolter fire were growing louder and louder.
There, it's set. Let's go.
You guys got it? Right! Let's make a run for it, boys!
This is an ancient vessel, so things might be a bit different, but I think I can find the nearest savior pods. Let's go.
Back on the Obeziana, Kazazel stood alone on the bridge as the hulking world eaters marched in flanking their warlord. The other crew members had armed themselves and taken up defensive positions at choke points all around the vessel. The warlord menaced the Drukhari and drew his hissing demon blade.
There is no more running, Eldar. Your blood is mine.
Oh, I
wouldn't be so sure about that. You see, we Eldar were made to fight idiots who sold their souls to thirsting gods. At least our old enemies had the sense to ask for immortality, and not just vague promises of power, anger management issues, and bad skin. On the Chaos ship, emergency sirens were blaring as fighting spread throughout the lower decks. Each scene you sprinted past was more gruesome than the last. Whether it was reptilian mutants tearing apart apostles of Chaos Undivided and eating their flesh, or vicious cultists covering themselves in the blood of their enemies while looting their fallen foes and harvesting grisly trophies. You round one corridor to see one of the pitmongers who was swollen with vat-grown muscle in the clutches of a cornate. The raging beast tore the powerful man apart as easily as a cruel child tears the wings off a butterfly. You and Teresa do not linger. You quickly lose track of Book and his men as you run through narrow corridor after corridor, clambering down claustrophobic stairways to hallways full of new, fresh horrors. Each time you catch a glimpse of the Chaos Space Marines, you merely sprint on, wanting to attract as little attention as possible. How long had it been? How much time was left? Each and every moment you desperately hope that you were drawing closer and closer to the outer hull of the vessel. There you would find savior pods. Then it was a matter of hoping that somehow the situation on the Obaziana, well, you hoped it hadn't been blown up or turned into a floating charnel house. You run with every ounce of strength you have, hoping that you can evacuate before the bomb detonates. You were about to give up hope. But then, suddenly, you emerge to a new hallway and you see it. You see a wonderful line of savior pods. It looked like a number had already been fired off. There were only a few left in this section of the ship. You do not hesitate. You and Teresa unseal the pods and get in, each of you crammed into the single-person vessels. It felt like a coffin being sealed in there, though perhaps with a little more room, as these things were designed to hold space marines. You throw the lever to launch yourself, when suddenly you hear the roar of ceramite boots pounding against the metal, and a red blur out of the corner of your eye screams into view. This bestial creature, this monstrous space marine, rose his weapon as you felt the ancient pod shudder and lock into position. Just before launch, the Khorne Berserker hacks his weapon into Teresa's pod, tearing it open. You press your hands to the glass of your own pod, but only have a moment's glance. You hear a brief, muffled scream before you are surrounded by the blackness of the void, watching the Chaos vessel spiral away from you. Your stomach turns, and you feel cold and shaky as your stomach threatens to empty its contents. Your mind is racing. The adrenaline and excitement of the mission mixes with the confusing sorrow of losing Teresa so suddenly, and the helpless horror of being in this tiny pod, floating utterly alone and helpless in the void. A few moments later, the melta-bomb detonates, sending plumes of flame from that ship that are quickly snuffed out by the vacuum of space. But more explosions follow, more and more, as fuel and ammunition begin to cook off the entire ship, until it tears itself apart. The shock wave of the blast hits the Obaziana first, causing the vessel to slowly start tumbling from the force. When the blast hits you, your pod is sent tumbling end over end into the blackness. Your body is utterly unaccustomed to these G-forces as you spiral out of control. Your head swims as you slowly fall into blackness and lose consciousness. Darkness consumes you. No man do they call me, my mother and my father, and all my comrades as well. Thank you all for listening to this episode of Kazazel's Merry Marauders. If you enjoyed what you heard, do give this a like and a comment. This was a very difficult episode to write, and I do hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't yet subscribed, please do so in order to hear the very final episode of this series, and that way you can find out what happens next. If you would like to support me, my Patreon, my PayPal, and my Teespring are all linked down below. And if you have absolutely no idea what's going on, you can click on the Kazazel's Merry Marauder playlist, which should be appearing on screen right now. Thank you all very much once again for listening. No man out.